John Stepp for teaching last Sunday, and I did watch the class.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you did a good job. I'm serious about that. And even though he thinks I gave him the hard pass. Actually, it was a little bit of a challenge. I know that. Yeah. But it was the next lesson. So
Yes,
He did it on purpose.
he did.
You did it on purpose.
I did. That's what he said. It was what was next in line. So, but he handled it well.
Yeah.
No. All right. We're in 1 Peter. We're in chapter 2. And I want to begin reading at verse 11 and down through verse 25. That's the end of the chapter. And by the way, I have combined 2 lessons on these notes. We're not going to get through all this today, but between today and next week we will. Okay? But that is on purpose. Notice the notes. It says somebody's watching you. Okay, that is somebody's watching you. That's verses 11 and 12 of chapter 2. Then on the back, submit me. Oh boy, that topic is something, isn't it? Submission. Submit me. And we're going to talk about submission of believers to government and the submission of believers to employers. Now, when I get to that, we'll talk about it. But you know, when Peter writes in verse 18, slaves, submit yourselves to your masters with all respect. You know how we have to apply that, don't you? We have no idea what he's talking about there in our experience. But in the Roman Empire, he's talking to slaves. They have they don't own themselves. Other human beings own them as property and have absolute and total control, even to the point of killing them. Lawfully. Total ownership over another human being. But we have no idea. So we apply it in application to the job you have and the employer you have. That's a real watered down application. But it's got to be an application, or else we just skip over it. So just keep that in mind. We're talking about submission of believers to government, submission of believers to employers. And we'll talk about political activism a little bit. And somebody's watching you. We want to begin. We'll probably spend most of the class today on the first page. So here we go. Verse 11. Dear friends, I urge you as aliens and strangers in the world to abstain from sinful desires which war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. Submit yourselves, for the Lord's sake, to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men. Live as free men, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as servants of God. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the brotherhood of believers. Fear God. Honor the king. Slaves, submit yourselves to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if a man bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because he is conscious of God. But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and you endure it? But if you should suffer for doing good and you endure it, This is commendable before God. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, no deceit was found in his mouth. When they hurled insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were like sheep going astray, but now you have returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. Now, we are in this remember, chapter 1, verses 3 to 12. That's in the indicative mood. What I mean is Peter's teaching. Let me go back down to this one and just talk about the situation. Uh-oh, what happened now? Oh, yeah, the situation. Here's a summary of the whole book, and especially of chapter 1, verses 3 to 12. The people Peter wrote to, and I keep going back and forth, but here's who he wrote to. God's elect, strangers in the world, scattered among the provinces of Cappadocia, Pontus, Galatia, Bithynia, and Asia. So basically, Turkey. Asia came all the way down here. Galatia came all the way down there. What we would call Turkey today, but this was a thriving area of believers, of Christians. But he writes to them, and the people Peter wrote to were displaced believers, strangers, scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia. Okay, they were displaced believers who were being singed, not sings. They're not singing, singed by the flames of persecution. Their circumstances were the bleakest imaginable. Yet Peter didn't try to pump them up with positive thinking. Instead, I love this word picture. It's like people who are discouraged. They're facing hard times. Who knows about their families? These are Christians in the Roman Empire. The state was coming after them now. In fact, Peter lost his life at this time. So did Paul. Talk about a loss in the church. But it was time God brought them home. God allowed Nero to execute them. So these people are going through difficulty. So he gently touched his hand to their chins. When someone lifting them up. And lifted their faces skyward. So they